2. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. James's Bible Study. Here we are on settling for our scriptures for this particular Sunday coming up, and we're looking forward to going through these lectionary scriptures. And we are on the corner of 141st Street and St. Nicholas Avenue in the little old village of Harlem, little old city of New York, in New York City. And so we give thanks to God for our scriptures and our prayers through our scriptures as well, which we're open with our opening prayer, Psalm 90, 1 through 17. We're actually going to do the whole thing because I looked at those other verses in between and said, no, we can make that happen. This is the last section of the book of Psalms, actually. There are 5 sections to the Psalms, and this is book number 5, and this starts it. And this is an interesting psalm as I was working on it. It's listed as a prayer of Moses, man of God. It's the only psalm that is attributed to Moses out of all of them, out of all 150. And it's a community prayer asking God to rein in God's wrath. And we'll get into that just a little bit more. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn us back to dust and say, turn back, you mortals. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night. You sweep them away. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed. In the evening it fades and withers. For we are consumed by your anger. By your wrath we are overwhelmed. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days pass under your wrath. Our years come to an end like a sigh. The days of our life are 70 years, or perhaps 80 if we are strong. Even then, their span is only toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due to you. So teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart. Turn, O Lord. How long? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, so that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad as many days as you have afflicted us, and as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be manifest to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and prosper for us the work of our hands. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. Amen. Interesting psalm. Let's see. Moses and our scripture the past last week or week before asked God to have compassion on the people. Moses often does that with God, and scholars used to assume that this psalm is a meditation on human frailty and God's eternity. But when you get deeper into it, a lot more study has gone into it and said it can be best viewed as a community petition, complaining that God's wrath has lasted beyond a normal human lifespan and asking how much longer will this unhappy state continue in verses 11 through 12. But the interpretation that I just read to you, it is based on these 2 pieces of evidence. Ancient sufferers often sought to know how long tribulations were fated to last, as in Psalm 13. And an improved translation of verses 11 through 12 might be, who knows the predetermined extent of your anger? Teach us to calculate our days of affliction, and let us bring that awareness to our minds. So that's sort of pretty much where that goes. And this divine eternity is contracted with human mortality, verses 1 through 6. And here in this, you turn us back to dust and say, turn back on mortals. God decreed mortality and a short lifespan for human beings. And this verse, like grass, this is found a couple of other times in the scriptures, where in Psalm 102:11, it says, my days are like an evening shadow. I wither away like grass, which I characterize as a poetic notion of fleeting life. That's just my language for that. And then Isaiah 40:6 through 8a, where it says, a voice says, cry out. And I said, what shall I cry? All people are grass. Their constancy is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. And I characterize this more as a lament over the notion of the fleeting notion of life. So this term grass sort of holds this, both of these notions together. There's this poetic way of knowing that our days are numbered and what we can do with the span of our lives, but also the lament that our days are numbered. And that fits in with the rest of this particular psalm, because when we get, I'll talk to you when I get to that a little bit later in the years, but it really is asking God, we understand that we are consumed by your anger, that we've done some stuff that has not made you pretty happy. Psalmist complains, though, that it's unfair to have to live one's life in a period of wrath, an entire life, with God's withdrawal of divine blessing. So this is the complaint that is being brought forward to God. It's saying, okay, we get the fact that there will be some wrath, that there will be some upset that you'll have with us, but really, for an entire lifespan, from birth to death, we're not going to see anything but your wrath. Where's your blessing? And this is what this psalm is really asking God about. We don't want this. And there are these numerical parallelisms that even an extremely old person will never enjoy a period of blessing. Think about that. To have 70, 80, 90, 100 years of life, but to only be suffering. And to think about the people whose lifespans we know, people who have lived their lifespans under oppression or in war, or in situations in which they are thought of as other, and their entire lifespan they feel that it's never enjoyed a blessing. Who considers the power of your anger? Your wrath is as great as the fear that is due to you. Your wrath is as great as the honor, the awesome honor that is due to you. So in the counting of our days, when we realize that our time as mortals on this earth are finite, what do we do to count our days to bring about wisdom, and to bring about wisdom in how to enjoy life and how to find the good things in life, even as we seem to think and believe maybe that we're only going through a period of wrath. And this is where this psalm sort of switches, and its whole psychology, like most of the lament psalms. I love this because this is so clear here for me in verses 12 to 13, is this idea of, but God, you can do something different with that. And I find hope in the idea that even when we are suffering and think that there is the wrath of God and that our lives are nothing but a mess, that if we count the wisdom of the fact that our lives are finite, and we really look at our lives, we can find the blessings. May God turn from God's wrath so that the community might experience God as divine and favorable and near. And that to me is this petition that we have in the verses 13 through 17. God, please turn from your wrath, not just so that we don't want to suffer. Of course we don't want to suffer. But to be turned away from your blessing, your nearness, and you being favorable to us is such a blessing and so powerful. We want to experience that. So have compassion and let us have the best of you, God. Divine wrath was often seen as lasting for a definite period. In Jeremiah 25:11-12, this whole land shall become ruin and waste, Israel, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Then after 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, the land of the Chaldeans, for their iniquity, says the Lord, making that land an everlasting waste. The speaker asked that this time period of God's wrath be shortened or ended. It's very, very powerful, this particular psalm. I thought about, it brings me back to the beginnings of the congregation that started at Shiloh. You know, those folks that had gotten out of slavery and had finally gotten to New York City and found this African-American congregation and were able to possibly maybe read this particular psalm. I know I'm throwing some romantic notions onto this and some narrative notions onto this, but if those those who were enslaved were freed, and they realized that their freedom was the end of God's wrath in this nation for them, and that they had an opportunity to find divine blessing in their freedom and in their liberation. I want people to know that God's blessing and God's favor can be found. And when we turn away from just looking at what's horrible in our lives, that there is something good that God does have, and we can find that God's favor and God's being near to us can bring us joy. And that this...
Can I answer?
Yes.
No, I'm trying to understand the extent of the wrath, and is it because all of the people were doing things that were against the laws?
Well, that's why this is attributed to Moses, because they want us to bring back to the idea of the fact that they were worshiping that golden idol. You know, they were complaining about the lack of water and the lack of food, and they kept saying it'd be better for us to go back to Israel. And God just got fed up. I think that the attribution to this of Moses makes us automatically go back to that time period. But like, for example, even with Jeremiah, when people went into the exile, in Jeremiah and Isaiah, the exile was about people weren't following the commandments, and God pulled away and said, you're going to go into exile. But it was only for a determined amount of time that God made that happen. So yeah, it is about the entirety of the people turning away from God in this particular sense. And I'm drawing the analogy that in our lives, that that Christ has given us the grace that we know that God's love and protection is with us. And even though we may go through some hard times, where might we find God's favor and God near us? That's our question for our lives, that we may be able to ask for ourselves. But you all can talk about this a little bit more, because I've been talking for a little bit too long.
I've been really grappling with, and it's interesting that we're having this study today, with the whole idea of suffering, and why do some people suffer and others not? And it's not because they're evil or they've done something to break the laws. So I'm not understanding the reason some people suffer and others don't. And you mentioned people who are at war or who are being oppressed, like the slaves. They didn't do anything necessarily to bring on that kind of wrath. So is it more that things happen? It's not that it's ordained. It's just that as human beings, we're just going to go through good and bad, whether we do anything or not.
Yeah.
I think that it rains on the just as well as the unjust, unfortunately. And that it's really hard to see this notion of those who are rich and famous and powerful as, in the long run, in the 1,000-year span of their the entirety of the world that they create and that they sort of feel as if they are ruling and running, that their souls go to waste. And it's hard for us to see that at that point in time. But it's so funny how most people that suffer, many people that suffer, do find a way to turn for some sort of solace and comfort to God, or people can find solace and comfort from God. Whereas I don't see a lot of, I worked a lot with a lot of wealthy people who died going to their graves having no solace in life. They had everything that they wanted, but they had no solace, and they had no peace, and they had no wisdom, and they had no joy of God, and they had no joy of spirit. And they thought that the money was going to get them all of that. And yet I also know that my Aunt Dot, who worked for the judge as a domestic and lived her life, a hard, rough life coming up from North Carolina, that she died happy. She died full, knowing that God had blessed her because she was able to see the blessings around her dinner table every Sunday. So it's difficult when we look at it in the binary of why do some people suffer and some people not suffer, because it's not as clear as that. I like to ask, why is it that some people have better spiritual blessings than others? And that to me is easier to answer, because it's like those are the people that are trying to build a relationship with the divine and build a relationship with God, and they can see those blessings more clearly because God makes them evident.
I know that I've had a very severe illness that really I thought that I was going to die. I was like feeling ready, and I didn't feel any fear. I felt, and I told my son, I felt very much at peace. And it was just weird, because I thought it was weird because I was just fine with it.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and I was thinking as you were talking that, because life is finite, that we shouldn't think only of the amount of life that we have, because we continue in some form afterwards. So if we have trauma and turmoil for most of our lives, we still have an eternity where we might not have all that hardship. But I think, like you were saying, it makes a difference if you have something to believe in and you're about to leave the earth, but you don't feel any fear because there's something better on the other side of it. The only sadness I felt was for my family, but none for myself.
And I've had people say to me, Derek, you're too smart. They literally said this to me. You're too smart to fall for that Christianity stuff. So why are you going to seminary? Right? I've had people say that to me, and I look at them and I say, who are you? Who are you to take away the joy and the comfort of people that, whether you believe it or not, I know that people know that there is a God for them in their lives, and that Jesus Christ makes a difference, and that the Holy Spirit makes a difference. And I want to be a part of making that difference in people's lives in the congregation. That's why I'm going to seminary. So you can do whatever you want to and not believing in God and so on and so forth. But there are people that do, and there are people that want to come together and they want to express that. And I want to be a part of that with them. And I want to help guide that experience with them. And that's why I'm going to seminary. So it's like, I don't care really what you think. People have a desire to be close, and those people that want to have a desire to be close, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. And my roommate from college is her father was a minister, and now she's an atheist. And we have argued, and she was so talked about how close she was to her father. And I sometimes want to say, why didn't you voice some of these feelings while your father was living, if you really felt them so strongly? And I'm not sure why she's atheist, but she wants to argue about the atheism as opposed to the stupid belief in God. And I told her, I said, you have your belief, I have mine. I'm not critical of yours, and you don't have the right to be critical of mine. So let's just accept what we are. And that's it. you don't have to, I don't have to be pleased and you don't have to be pleased. It doesn't really matter.
And I like
But
the idea that
just
I'm like,
pictures.
I need my God and my Christ and my Holy Spirit because it gives me joy and it makes me go through life. You need your atheism the same way that I need my God. And that's on you. And that's your world. And I've often had that conversation with atheists that go to seminary and say to them, this is your belief. This is your belief system. Your belief system is just as structured as mine. The way that you argue that God doesn't exist
Mhm.
is just as structured as the way that I argue that God does exist. So you need atheism, and you need that belief system and structure as your form of thought. So who are you to tell me that my way of thought that makes me feel divine and whole and makes this life beautiful to me? Who are you to tell me that I should not avail myself to that? And I respect you. You can, if that's the way you want to roll that way,
Mhm.
go for it.
Yeah.
If that brings you comfort,
But I wonder if it does at the end. How many people go through their whole lives not thinking they need anything, but like you were talking about the person who's so wealthy, but it didn't make them feel good at the end.
yeah.
And I think that says a lot, that even atheists, there's a comedian, unfortunately, who says that people who don't call on God, but if you that God said, when the big C comes, then everybody's calling on me.
Yeah.
So
Falling on them.
yeah.
The part where in this passage where it talks about
Mhm.
how fleeting man's life is, I think about that rather often,
Mhm.
because I remember being like 8 years old
Mm.
and looking at my grandmother and thinking, I'm never going to be old like you. It's like, I just was like, I was convinced my grandmother was born that way.
That way,
You
yeah.
Right,
know,
right,
like,
right.
wearing a big apron and sensible shoes and all of that, And when I got to be like 13, I was like convinced my parents were from another planet somewhere, and
Mhm.
and and now that I'm approaching 70, I'm like, how did that happen?
It's
When,
true.
when
That's true.
when did it happen? And so every time I read passages like that, I'm like, yeah, bro, I understand what you're talking about. It's like you stood on the corner and you turned around. It was 4 years later, and you're out of college. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
and then like you're looking back in a few years and you've retired, and you said, wait a minute, I worked 34 years, 35 years. And
Yeah.
it's always to me an issue of, well, what do I do now?
Mm.
What's next? You know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I don't want my life to speed so fast without enjoying what Moses is saying here, as many years and days, as many days as of affliction as I've had, as
Mhm.
joy. You know what I'm saying? It's like I've been through the hard times. I've been through terrible illnesses, accidents, and losses, and all of that.
Mhm.
And and fighting the man and the system and all of this. And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, that's 68 years of that. I want more.
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
that speaks to the favor of the Lord of our God be upon us and the prosper for us for the work of our hands.
Hmm.
And when I think about that, I always think about my mother saying, "Oh, just keep on living.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
That's what Rachel said. Just keep on living.
she sure
Or
did.
as we sing in the Baptist church, you'll understand it better by and
By and
by.
by.
Yeah.
By and by,
yeah.
when those days arrive.
My grandmother
You
used
know?
to say that. Yeah, keep on living.
By and
Just
by,
keep
just keep
on
on
living.
living. Just keep on living. But it
Mm.
also makes me stop and understand that, God is in every minute. And so, when Derek stops in and, pauses it in Cape May and stops for a minute to sit in my house and listens to a minute of my life. And, it makes me recognize that is the favor of God
Yeah.
as he sits down to just share a minute with me. But if I don't magnify it, and if I don't see it, and if I don't understand that it is the favor of the Lord upon us both, then I miss it all. And those are the moments that I think that God has blessed us with when, as you said, Reverend, we've lived through some things, but then God has allowed us the compassion as servants to say, but we see the gift and what you bring us in the days going forward. And I just magnify every day. I really do.
Yeah.
I really do. And even when he comes in, I was very clear that, that 15 minutes was only 15 minutes.
Mhm.
But when my girlfriend, affirmed how she felt in his, now she doesn't know him like me. She's not from Cape May necessarily. But in that minute, she felt that moment. Then it affirms, the favor, and that God, clearly shows to those who are faithful to his word, those the prosper of the work, of the ups and the downs, as you said. And there's been many downs, a lot of ups, but many downs.
Yeah.
But he brings to discernment to our eyes. He clears our vision to see. But you're blessed in this moment. Make sure you
And
magnify it.
and when you go through those downs, it's like, where do you go? Who do you turn
Yeah.
to? And
Yeah.
like when people tell you, "Oh, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God," and I'm just I look at them in pity, because I'm like, how do you get through the death of a mom and you don't believe in God?
Mm.
How do you get through the death of most of, well, all of the past generation of your family and not believe in God? How do you move
Who
forward
do
in
you
life
call
and
on
not believe
when
in
you're in the
God?
middle of a flight
Yes.
and all of a sudden the flight's going down? You better call God.
Go to
You
the
better
rock.
call God.
You're not calling your banker.
You're not calling your banker because the plane's going down. You better call God. And that's who they call.
Linda, when you bring out that verse 15, make us glad as many days as you have afflicted us and as many years as we have seen evil. It takes me back to the first book that starts the entire poetic section of the Bible. The poetic section actually starts with the book of Job. And we don't really realize that Job is like in the same section as Psalms and Proverbs. And when we go through all of the craziness and read about Job and all the ways that the devil afflicted him and so on and so forth, here's when I read this verse 15, because I was just talking about this the other day with someone who just finished reading Job. It's like the very last part of Job. It's like he gets it all back. So he's as many days as he was afflicted, he gets those days of good before he dies. And that is like an allegory. That's part of the allegory of that, to make sure that people understand that there can be that kind of a formula that happens there. So this petition for that is a recognition that God is able to give us as many days of glad, and as many years of glad. And that's what I love about laments. They talk about, we feel in the wrath, we do this, we do that, but it's like, then I recognize your power. And I know that you can do this. That's what I'm going to ask for. Prosper the work of our hands. Whew.
And you think about all the healings that Jesus did.
Right.
You know, the woman that suffered however many years, and he healed her. What happened after that? It was much more joy that she had suffered through those times of pain and sickness and being alienated and so forth. And then there was the healing. And there were hopefully as many days, we don't know, I don't think, but as many days of gladness and being accepted and rejoiced upon. That's what gives me the hope too, is that you know there have been demonstrations of the goodness from the badness, and it's just very reassuring, very reassuring.
That's God. That's when people say, "Look at God."
That's right. But God.
Yeah. So let us thank you all for that. That's a powerful, powerful psalm, and we dissected it in a way that hasn't been dissected in many communities, I don't think, in many of the communities in which I've been. So I thank you for that very much. And now we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 12, which is the death of Moses. If you remember last week, a teaching elder, Reverend Althelia Pond, just sort of dropped a little bit of nugget of knowledge to say that this Deuteronomy is sort of like this whole idea of a resummation of what happens in the Torah. And I wanted you to understand that this word Deuteronomy comes from, remember I talked about the Greek Septuagint, how Rome actually translated into Greek the Hebrew scriptures with 70 scholars. So they named all of these things Deuteronomion, which yielded the Latin Deuteronomy, whatever that is, and meaning the second law. So the thought is, and I love this because this is something that I hadn't really considered before, that I really am very happy about. It says, it's thought that Moses revisits the laws in the first four books of the Torah and uses this particular book to teach the knowledge to the people. There's a difference about laying down the law and teaching the law. And that this is the book that sort of puts it in a way in which you may be able to learn it and imbibe it in a new way. And I thought that was a really nice way of understanding Deuteronomy and the purpose of Deuteronomy for the people. So we have all of the rules and regulations in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and then Deuteronomy says, okay, well, here's all the stuff that we just talked about. So we're going to put it in this way, and we're going to talk about it in this way. So this can be a sort of a compendium for you to go to. So here we are.
Let's review, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
An end of the term review.
Yeah,
The term is Moses' life.
yeah. And if I can interject, good evening, everyone. They had to review it because now when we get to Deuteronomy, the original generation has died off.
Right.
So now this is
Right.
the new generation that's going forth.
Yeah.
So there was in Exodus when Moses relayed what God said about the Sabbath, God told the people to remember the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And when God speaks to Moses again about the Sabbath in Deuteronomy, he says, observe the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that dual thing of remembering and also doing. I just kind of wanted to share that.
I'm glad you did. Thank you. It's good. This is a wonderful crafting of an ending for Moses that we're about to read here. So let us read this scripture. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead, as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the lands of Judah, as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar, The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all of Israel. Yeah, I want somebody to write my obituary like that.
I'm going to wait for you to do your thing, Rev. There's something jumped out at me from this text right away.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The end where it says, "Never has there been a prophet." I was like, they're describing Jesus there.
Never since for these people. Well, here's the other thing. A closer reading is, but there never again arose in Israel a prophet like Moses. And our version of our reading, that this annotated Oxford NRSV New Revised Standard Version, it obscures the tension between the perspective of this verse and the divine promise that the line of prophetic succession will continue in the future, rather than dreams or visions. Other traditions reject the concept that Moses had such direct access to God. And some of that is our tradition, because we know that this language, like you say, is very Jesus language, is closeness with God, face to face. And some people will just sort of say, no, that's for Jesus. But also it's the idea that Moses was selected by God to bring these people out into this land, and never before was there anyone to pull them out and to definitely confront other leaders like that they would also want to have kings raised up from them, as we talked about before. When they complained, they had judges and then they had kings. After Joshua, then they move forward and they have judges, and then they say, God, we want kings, and then they have kings, and then the kings become human beings, and then everything gets messed up again, and then we have Jesus to sort of clear this up. And we also think, Lisa, that this is also, I love the fact that you brought this, is because this is sort of most likely an added on piece to continue on in the making of, in the hagiography, one of my favorite words, hagiography, which means making holy. It is a way of making someone holy. Like when the saints are, when Mother Teresa was just a Mother Teresa, and when she died and they wanted to make her a saint, they went through all of her life and they did a hagiographic review of her life, making her holy.
It's sort of like a Greek drama, you know?
Yeah.
At the end, or even Shakespeare used that a lot as well. Like at the end of a play, there was always like a narrator that summed up the play.
Mm.
Where do you think they got it from?
And speaking of getting stuff from things, I mean, there's a succession plan.
Yes. Yes.
Verse 9, I guess it's 8 and 9. There's a succession plan. I just thought, wow, anybody who runs an organization just needs to read this, you know, to know that there needs to be a succession plan, and there would have to be.
Mhm.
But and I also was wondering about the locations.
I'll get to that in just a moment, because I want to, when you talk
Me
about,
too, Andrea. I was like, wait a minute.
when you talk about the transfer,
Fast enough, Derek.
I want to leave you that Moses is the greatest exemplar of prophecy, both in direct access to divine revelation and empowered to work miracles. So that's this double elevation, which makes him different from the more human representations of him elsewhere in Exodus, which, like I said, also suggests a later editorial idealization in retrospect. This thing about, when you talk about the succession plan, Andrea, Joshua was full of the spirit of wisdom. The spirit of wisdom is, Deuteronomy revisits earlier traditions to stress that wisdom is an essential qualification for office. What did Solomon ask for, remember?
Yes.
So thus what Joshua receives from Moses is this wisdom. Joshua already in Numbers 27:18 possesses this undefined spirit, often associated with prophecy or possessions, while Moses translates this authority of the spirit of wisdom to him, and it's a means of, when he lays his hands on him, it's a means of the transfer of the attributes here used for investiture into an office. And that's what we do when we sort of lay hands on folks as well. But I just wanted to go to that. And let me go back up after I plug in my computer, because I don't want it to go away.
Who wrote Deuteronomy?
There we are. I know, right? Okay, so you want to know about the locations. Okay, let's see.
At the top, but also at the bottom, when it talks about Moses being the
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that too.
okay, fine.
Andrea?
You all
I
starting to
know,
think
I'm
just
glad.
alike now. So,
Okay.
okay, so in this first part, when Moses is up on the mount on the plains of Moab, this is Mount Nebo in the Transjordan to the east that he's able to see, east of Jericho, Mount Pisgah, slightly to the northeast. This is to preserve that they are both the same traditions, but it gives the breadth of the land. So I don't know if you can go to a top of any one mountain today and sort of see all of this area, but there's also, when you see that the names are listed to them, Gilead as far as Dan, these are the sons of Jacob. Naphtali, Dan, Ephraim. So these are the spaces that have been allotted to them for them to be able to live in. That's what this lofty vantage point allows Moses to look northward to the Sea of Galilee, the tribal allotment of Dan and Naphtali, to the Western Sea, the Mediterranean, south to the Negev Desert, and along the Jordan Rift in the valley as far as Zoar, once located in the southern end of the Dead Sea as one of the cities of the plain. So this is like a huge vista. And I posit, more so than it's like this us being able to say, oh, well, Moses got to see everything. Moses got to see the breadth of God's promise. And this, and that's in a way of looking at that as well. And we want to talk about Moses's, you want to talk about in the land of Moab, right? Well, here's this fascinating thing, this beautiful thing about Moses dying and Moses' death. The Lord's command, this is an unusual formulation of this command, and it greatly honors Moses, who's, despite being an old person and of advanced age, doesn't die of old age or succumb to physical or intellectual infirmity. So this land that he's buried in is a clear indication that God buried Moses, as God sealed Noah in the ark in Genesis 7:16. Instead of Moses' progeny assuming the responsibility for caring for the dead, God took it personally. God took care of it personally. Why is it in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but we don't know where it is? Because God is precluding the people from having pilgrimages to the site as a shrine and building an altar, and generations later having another God.
Mhm.
So that's where this whole, it's opposite of Beth Peor, somewhere in the land of Moab. Because it's like, no, you're not going to come here and sort of like make this reverent site so that people can come back and visit him. And somehow, some way can say, this is the father of our nation. Somehow we give Moses the praise that we're supposed to be giving God.
Are all of the lands actually people's names? They belong to those people. That's how the land got the name.
Many of them, yes, most of them were assigned to the tribes of Israel, to the tribes of Jacob, to the sons of Jacob, which are the tribes of Israel. So they all got a piece of land. If you remember, Abraham and Lot got a piece of land that they had as well. So God said, when you come out of, this is all the land that was promised to them when they were, before they went into slavery. And now they're going back into all of that land that is sort of like the land of their people. I also found when I was studying the Tower of Babel, it's very interesting when you study the Tower of Babel and you look at all the places that are named into the places where they went. Those are also places that were set aside by God for the people, because the names in there are the names that we see like Manasseh, the names that we see like the Negeb and the plain. Those names are then given to these people to the persons of Jacob's lineage. So it gets confusing because the land becomes the name. The land was always, in this particular time, land is always named after the family that's on it.
And something else that I guess I'm piggybacking on what Andrea was talking about with the names. There's so many names here. Some of them we recognize as being, descendants of Jacob and Joseph and all of that. And then you have names like Ephraim and Manasseh, which was Joseph's two children from his Egyptian wife,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have all of these other names in there. And it's just interesting to me because God seems to be extending this promise in a way to people who are not the promised, the people of his promise covenant.
Well, it's difficult because it's not so much those people as it is, and this is the argument that is made coming forth in the book of Joshua, is that these are the lands that they're supposed to inhabit and take from other people as well. So that's where it gets difficult to sort of really parse out as we move forward. There's a major study of, when you study the mapping of it and you study the mapping of how this land is sort of meted out, it gets really confusing because I always say in Joshua, God tells them two things. There are two orders. One, go and kill everybody and take over the land. One, go and settle with people and take over the land. So there's a whole idea that we do want you to take this land, but in one way you got to kill everybody, but in the next you just become a part of the people in the entire area, and you sort of do it peaceably. So it does get a little confusing with that. And you talk about Joseph's sons. They were the lost. They become the lost tribes of Israel because later on they're not listed.
Yeah.
So these lands, if you're looking out, and gosh, let me see. There is. Let me see. Well, you probably can't see that. Oh, never mind. I'm not going to show it to you. It's the map of the Western Sea, the Mediterranean, the what Moses saw from Mount Nebo, and it's huge. It's huge. It's all of modern day Israel, and north and south. It's the land of Judah. It's what becomes in the emperor's time in the first century known as the land of Judah. It's not the Israelites' land, it's the land of Judah by the time that the emperors come around, and they are only known as not as Jewish people but as Judeans, because they're the people of the area. Rome, when they take things over, like I've been explaining to people, they take your name, they take your money, they take your language, and they rename all of your land. So everything that we see here, Manasseh, Naphtali, Dan, all that stuff got wiped away whenever they're conquered. And so it gets really confusing. But the whole point of this is that there's a mountain somewhere in this lower eastern quadrant of this area that Moses was supposed to be able to see everything. And it was also in the lower quadrant when you realize that they had been wandering for 40 years and they're coming up from the south. And they still have to go and expand northward and upward, and northward and westward. But that's Joshua's job.
There's something else I find interesting in this passage. It's like the middle part is missing. It's it's like God is showing Moses all the lands, and then all of a sudden Moses is dead.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what led up to Moses is dead? Well,
that's earlier on, because when Moses was told that he would not see the promised land, when he and Aaron, the second time that they struck the water, they struck the rock to make water happen. It reads as if Moses and Aaron are saying, Moses is saying, you wanted water, I'll give you some water. And God is like, you took credit for what I did.
Yeah.
And you will not go into the promised land. But you still have to lead these people, you still have to get them through to this, and blah, blah, blah. And it's there's a whole other study in terms of like what that means and how fair that is and why that happened. But that's when it happened much earlier. And he sort of knew he wasn't going into the promised land, but he got brought up to the mountain to see it. And to Reverend Pond's point, he was of a generation that most likely should not have gone forward because of all of the trauma and baggage that they would have carried from beforehand.
And God did say that, the whole generation would die out before they went, the people were allowed to go into the promised land.
Yeah. All except for Joshua, and Aaron a little bit. And the 30 days of mourning, it was also 30 days of mourning for Aaron that comes along later. Deuteronomy revisits earlier traditions to stress wisdom, as I said, as an essential qualification from office. Yeah, people will be able to read this as they go forward in the YouTube. We have a couple of scriptures to get through still. So think on that whole Exodus track, y'all. There's a lot going on. As we move to our second reading of 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. We read the exhortation in verses 1 through 10 in first chapter, Paul giving everybody compliments, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. Now, I love this. Why is Paul writing to the church in Thessalonica? Verses 1 through 6 will be recalling Paul's work at Thessalonica behind the ardent denial of deceit, impure motives, trickery, flattery, greed, and a desire for praise that there may be a suspicion of on some of the Thessalonians believers, that this is precisely what motivated Paul and his companions. But also, in contrast, the writers assure the believers that they had the full approval of God in acting and speaking as they did. When Paul and his merry band of persons went from place to place starting these churches, there was always some sort of dissension. And particularly what this scholar is thinking about is saying, they're sort of like saying that Paul is really doing all this for himself, trying to make a name for himself and raising money. And that's because that's what other philosophers were doing at the time. I want you to understand that the model of building a community is really very much based on the Grecian model of a philosopher's school, and the Roman model of a philosopher's school, where you go and you become well known for your wisdom. And there are people that love the flattery and that are greedy and that are taking from people. And Paul and his people, they're actually working. So they're a little bit opposite. But this is the letter that says, let me just remind you, this is how we came to you. You yourselves know, brothers and sisters, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully mistreated at Philippi, as you know, we had courage in God to declare to you the gospel of God in spite of great opposition. For our appeal does not spring from impure motives or trickery, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the message of the gospel, even so we speak, not to please mortals, but to please God, who tests our hearts. And as you know, and as God is our witness, we never came to you with words of flattery or with a pretext for greed, nor did we seek praise from mortals, whether from you or from others, though we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nurse tenderly caring for her children, her own children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us.
Who is the you?
The people in Thessalonian, the church at Thessalonian, the Thessalonians. So he's like, you all have become very, very important to us. So don't think that we're trying to use you for anything, as people may be saying. We never came to you with all of that. Paul is
like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I like that line where he says that he cares for them like a nurse tenderly caring for her own children.
Yeah,
and
we get to that.
Of our history of enslavement, where women had to tend the master's children
Yeah.
at the expense of their own. And so when they could catch a moment, you could imagine when they could catch a moment to be with their own children and love on their own children, how that would have been,
So this is rendered as a nursing mother. That's really what that phrase means, like a nursing mother tenderly caring for her own child. And it's domestic image of concern and nurturing here particularly, because it is, like you said, linked to her own children. And that's one of my favorite texts in the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of those texts that's outside of our Bible, but it's nothing but the sayings of Jesus. So it's not all this storytelling, all this. It's just what Jesus said. Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. Thank you, Anthony. Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And one of them is, you see that woman over there nursing her child? You must become like that in order to get into the kingdom of heaven. And it's a total emptying and a total receiving simultaneously. That's sort of one of my interpretations of that. And so this whole idea of a mother pouring her full self into her child, and a child receiving fully from that mother and giving back the same joy to that mother, is this reciprocal kind of deep, intimate, and trusting care, using the term nursing that you pointed out, which is great. Philippi, in Acts 16, 19 through 20, there's a woman who is casting fortunes or something, and people are making money off of her, and they get Paul and those guys, they stop her from doing it, and people complain. But when her owner saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews. So we were shamefully mistreated at Philippi." You knew that when we came to you, but we still decided that we were going to have the courage to talk to you about God, in spite of all of that.
And they did at Thessalonica too when they came.
Mm-hmm.
The riot that ensued
Yeah.
in that city that incited the people that drove them out, and they had to go to Berea. And then they got jealous because they were in Berea and they had to leave there and go to Athens.
So you know what we've done in spite of great opposition, and we're still writing this letter to you. And so that though we might have made demands as apostles, itinerant philosophers would be paid for imparting their wisdom, as I said, a practice carried out by some other Christian preachers or leaders, but not by Paul and his companions. So we don't do that. Yeah, and you know, the whole thing about being a tent maker, you know, there's a phrase, Linda, about tent makers, and for other folks that a tent maker is a pastor who goes and also who works in the community, or who works. So it's sort of like you don't have just one job, you're a tent maker, because Paul goes out and earns his own keep when he goes out and does these missions. The money that he collects for his missions are to bring Christianity to other places and to help those communities. It's not for him. That's the idea of Paul and his folk working wherever they go to place. But we do it to please, I love this, but to please God who tests our hearts. It doesn't spring from this deceit or impure motives or trickery. We know that that's what you're used to. We get it. We get that you may be a little bit wary about that. But we never came with flattery or a pretext for greed. So that will be the true mark. And you will hear this from us, and we're answering those complaints. Most letters from Paul, I'll say this again, most letters from Paul are reacting to something that has gotten to Paul's ears. That's why these letters are so powerful, because it's like many times we take them and we say, oh, well, this is the dogma that Paul is laying out. Paul is responding to something that has happened. You can always find it within the text. The Corinthians didn't have love. They were doing everything else. They had a lot of knowledge, but they didn't have love. So he does 12 chapters in the way that we've broken it up, 12 chapters of telling them, you're a little too high and mighty over yourself. And I know you've been arguing and all this other stuff, but if you don't have love, what good are you? So these phrases in here are our clues as to what is going wrong in Thessalonica and what he's responding to, the complaints that he's responding to about he and his companions.
And you know what, too, Derek? Although 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus are called pastoral letters because they were written to individuals, 1st Thessalonians is like a pastoral letter to the church.
Yeah.
And this chapter really does flow well out of the first chapter.
Yeah, it does.
He calls them beloved. And he talks about the love and the steadfastness and the hope and the faith.
You know what else, Reverend Pond? It's sort of like the people are hearing these complaints as well. The church is hearing these complaints about Paul. And that is insulting, and not insulting, but it's also dangerous to that community because people from the outside are trying to tear it down.
Right. And he wasn't there that long. He
Right.
was Sabbath. was there for like maybe 3 weeks before he got ran out of town. So they were really new converts and vulnerable, you know.
Hold on, y'all. You got it.
Were they going to go back to their old habits? You know, were they going to withstand the persecution? You know, I'm sure those questions probably were in his mind as he was penning this letter.
So this is a newsletter. A newsletter to the church. Hold on, y'all.
Yeah.
Hold on. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else we have a couple more minutes. Anybody else want to say anything else about this particular pericope? Great. Oh, and one thing that I love this idea, I want to put this on a business card. I come to declare to you the gospel of God in spite of the great opposition. This appeal does not spring from deceit or impure motives or trickery. I just want to put all this on the card and say, we speak not to please mortals, but to please God. As God is our witness, this comes from us in order to be flattered or the pretext for greed, nor do we seek praise from mortals or whether from you or from others. You know, there are some folks, and you all can sort of align yourselves to this, especially Reverend Pond, you know what I'm saying too about this. People will be like, I don't want to pay for the pastor's salary, down, blah, blah, blah. You ain't making me rich.
Quite the opposite.
But it's not a complaint, but it's sort of like this is the scripture that says, I'm not doing this for that. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, we're not doing this. We're not coming to Bible study and to church. And sometimes church with its respectability politics gets caught up in that. Mm. You know, we are the Presbyterian of New York City. We are the Presbyterian Church USA. We have $500 million in our foundation. Big deal. You're not using it.
And we don't get a cut.
Right. So that's like going, and so it's sort of like, it's not just me as a pastor or Reverend Pond as a pastor. It happens because it's a human failing and human frailty to sort of try and put these safeguards around us so that we do think that we have to be flattered. We do think that, well, you know, we need a little bit more, and all of that stuff translates, and I mean, it grows into greed, into demanding flattery, and into all of this stuff. So it's also a test. God is testing our hearts, not to actually, I was told, and I shared this with people before, I was told in my psychological evaluation that I was not suited for ministry because I needed to be liked too much. And when I went back and told the committee, I said, yes, I recognize that she said that. I said, but rather than looking at that as a complaint, I said, so that's something I look out for, huh? It's something you grow from. That's what I look at these things as, you know, and I'm like, these are things for our church to look at and say, oh, we are all susceptible to this, y'all.
Right, that's right.
And Paul writes them down so that we know what we can look for.
Acceptable. And once in a while, when we get too close, God says, God will remind us and go, and we get convicted, and we pull ourselves back.
And that's the joy of being and being in the Word and understanding, like when you see those little things happening and being able to deal with them with prayer and with faithful communication with one another and testimony, rather than some people will write you a letter and leave or say something, and they'll just be so damning and so insulting because they didn't get this kind of stuff. And I say, good, bless your heart. May God work with you and God keep you and bless you and keep you. And I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. I love these things that seem like they're condemning. They're actually ways in which we can live our lives, that we can sort of look out for the things that society wants us to do. This sounds like our society, right?
I was just about to say that, because it was like things, you know, like we see seeing this in politics right now. You know, words, appeals that come from deceit, impure motives, trickery, greed,
Wanting to be popular.
flattery, you know, words of flattery, you know, and seeking praise from, you know, mortals or voters. You know, we see this being revealed every day.
So this is our, I think when I talk about this and when I speak about this in public with people now, I'll say, this is our job. This is to call people out and say, but this is exactly what Paul was talking about. So don't tell me that, you know, that you're going by the tenets of this and this is, where's the humility? Where's the love of one another? Anyway, but that's a whole other political speech and sermon. So, and thank you for catching that nursing thing, because it's so important when we uplift not just women but also children, and the power of the relationship between parent and child and mother and child. And I was saying this to someone the other day, and I want us to have it in our mindset, that when Jesus says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," remember that children didn't count and weren't valued really in society until they were old enough to not die from those childhood things. I'm not going to invest in you if you're going to die before you're 12 or 13. But Jesus says, no, bring them here. So Matthew 22, we're moving on in that chapter. We're continuing right along in that chapter 22, 34 through 46. And Matthew, verses 34 through 40, the love commandment for the book of Matthew is preeminent. All other commandments are subsidiary and to be interpreted and performed out of love for God and one's neighbor. I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So these people had been testing Jesus, and they didn't catch him in anything. Whose head is that on the coin? Blah blah blah. And the Pharisees continue. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him again. Teacher, a lawyer meaning a lawyer of the Torah.
Okay.
Which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question. What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said to them, how is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet? David thus calls him Lord. How can he be his son? No one was able to give him an answer. Nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. That little conundrum we'll get to. This, if you remember, we did another text in one of the other chapters where when Jesus asked the lawyer and said, which commandment is the best? He said, you have answered correctly, but also like it, love your neighbor. There is this Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. This is an extension of in the retelling of how what laws are important. in Deuteronomy. This love your neighbor one comes up very, very powerfully. So this is the greatest, and the first commandment is to love God, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I've spoken about this. If you go through the commandments and you think that if you break or you go against any of those teachings and precepts and concepts, the filter for us is to say, does this make me, am I showing love to my neighbors and to myself and to God? I hate to use this strategy on this YouTube, but it's something that I've used in work before. It's called you put things through a strategic filter. And this is the literal application of it. When you have a vision, and you have a vision for your organization, and you have all these other options that are coming to you, you look at what your vision is and what your values are, and you pour things through your strategic filter. So if I'm being called to do something, and I say, but wait a minute, my value is to love my neighbor as myself, does that mean that I'm loving my neighbor as myself? If not, I need to shift and move with that. I've had to do that this past week. I did that with myself last week, actually, in response to a situation that came to me. I said, well, I can respond, and here's how I want to respond. I said, but is that following the commandments that Jesus talked about? And I thought about it, and I checked myself. And it helped me to reframe how I responded. And so I love this, that I can put that language into that strategic filter language into these scriptures as well. Now, this whole thing, this Son of David thing, Jesus asked this query of his own. In Psalm 110, verse 1, David describes the Lord, God, as speaking to the Lord, my Messiah. So how can David's Lord be his son, since it is invariably sons who call their fathers my Lord? This is a conundrum that is just, we don't have time to go deeply into this, but they say this whole Son of David thing, this Messiah, the Messiah who will come, because they do not believe that he is the Messiah. And in Matthew, it is really important that he draws the lineage. If we remember the genealogy of Jesus, Matthew needs to draw it back to the Son of David, because it fits the prophecy and it fits the legacy that Jewish people will have, and it legitimizes Jesus in the Jewish community. So the Messiah, whose son is he? They say the Son of David. So he's basically saying, oh, is the Messiah going to be the Son of David, or is it really going to be the Son of God? He doesn't throw it out and say, that is my Father. But he says, so, and he doesn't say it out loud that I am the Messiah. He said, but how can I, if I'm the Messiah, the Son of David, and David called him Lord, then how can the Messiah? No, this doesn't work. The whole formula is that for Jesus, I am here on behalf of God, and God is my Father. So they're waiting for this erstwhile Messiah to come, who's the Son of David, and they're looking for all these signs, and there are all these other Messiahs that are around in the time claiming that they are of the lineage of David and so on and so forth. And he's like, no, that's not it. It's the relationship to God. And I think the word Lord is what confuses us here. Because they're both capitalized, and I don't know which one shouldn't be capitalized. Oh,
So it's true that all sons call their father Lord?
My
That's
Lord.
the first time I've heard this.
Lord is a title, and most sons and households do give that deference in that first century.
Oh.
The Lord of the house and my Lord. So yeah, there is that distinction in that way of calling someone of that title. I'm trying to think, because I know that servant has these two
You hear
definitions.
that in like medieval times in Europe, where
Mm.
the man of the house would be called my lord. It would be a wealthy person or a person of some status.
And
But
yeah, this is thrown in from interpretations as well. So I have to figure out what that Greek really says.
verse 44,
Uh-huh.
my understanding is that both Lord should be in capital letters,
Yeah, they
because
are.
David is talking through the Holy Spirit, it seems, and he's saying that the Lord, the great I am, is speaking to the Messiah, my Lord. Sit at my right hand until I put my enemies under your feet. And so Jesus is asking this question. It's like, how can David be calling the Messiah Lord when the Messiah is supposed to be his son? And they can't answer that.
They can't answer anything.
Yeah. I mean, the Pharisees failed, and so they pushed the Sadducees to come forward and try their work, and they couldn't do it either.
And they're just trying to catch him up in claiming in blasphemy. Like, where can we catch him in blasphemy within this whole thing? Who is God and who is the Son of God and who is the Messiah? All that other stuff. When you notice that when they do take him to be executed or take him to Rome to ask Rome for him to execute him, that's one of the charges, is that he's blasphemous with us. They rent their clothes and tear their robes apart because of that. They think that he's blaspheming God and blaspheming the power and the singularity of God by calling himself the Son of God in that aspect.
One thing I noticed about how Jesus treated the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the temple leaders, he didn't really answer their questions. He would answer their questions with a question that stumped them, and then they slunk away. The only person he really had, the only person we know of that he had an extended conversation with was Nicodemus.
Mm-hmm.
But the people, the ordinary people, he explained heavenly concepts to them using earthly terms and concepts, through parables.
Yeah.
He did a lot of explaining to them so they could understand, but the people who were supposed to have the knowledge, he didn't answer them most of the time.
And the Greek transliterates in verse 45, therefore, if David calls, let's go to 22:44. The Lord said to my Lord, sit on the right of me until I put the enemies of you under the feet of you. Therefore, if David calls him Lord, how the son of him is he?
Mm. It's a good question.
Well, nobody dared to ask any more questions after that.
But Matthew answers that question with his genealogies.
Yeah. It's important for him to give those genealogies in that aspect. So how are you all doing? You feeling okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on that Psalm. It's always very interesting to me to get caught up in the psalm when we have all these other texts. But that is, for some reason, it's that and the Thessalonians text where we were really focusing on those guideposts of all those words. It's got me thinking about that filter. The filter of, because when I was doing my study of it, the filtering language came for those words. But then they ended up coming into the gospel, that filtering of just the 2 commandments. And I like that too. So.
Years ago, many years ago, I think I was like in my teens or 20s, I used to listen to this radio program that was like way before technology. And it was a religious program, and they always began with a recording of Psalm 90. First few verses. They didn't go through the whole one, but I remember especially that first verse, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. And, when I read that the other day, I was like, oh, wow. It brings back such great memories.
Yeah. Wow.
Going back to, how fleeting life is.
And then we pray, gracious God, slow us down from the human concept of time. And may we slow down enough to understand that the second that you give us contains a miracle, contains a blessing. May we be wise enough to see it in the colors of the trees in the Adirondacks. May we be wise enough to see it in the eyes of the young people who receive scholarships in the name of the Bradfords. May we be wise enough to see it and hear it in the silence when the waves are crashing in the ocean, calming our bodies and our spirits. May we recognize the blessings and your gifts to us day by day when the world wants to distract us and make us think that you have abandoned us. Help us to turn and say, have you seen the sparrow and the lilies of the field? My God is an awesome God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.